asking questions. So when Nigel's finished being very clever on the bottom of his screen here, we will get to...
We will be ready to go.
We'll be ready to go. I'm ready to go, Nigel.
Great.
Are you ready to go, Nigel?
I'm almost there. So let's go back to our presentation. There we go.
Here we go.
So look,
this is me. Yep, it's my turn. So a few months have gone past since we put out our newsletter in the first week of December. That's the hard copy written newsletter. The petition presented to Parliament we'll discuss in a couple of slides' time. The RVA, that's the owners group, ran 4 forums for chairs of village resident committees and anybody else who wanted to go. Several of us attended one or more of those. There were good presentations, but the questions coming from the floor clearly show there was still a lot of aggravation in villages. We've been concerned for some time that a lot of village managers are not trained for the role. Now, that's not a criticism of those managers. It's the fact that in some cases, operators are pulling people out of industries where they have not been in a case of interfacing with a large group of people, average age 81 years, and also having a degree of care. And so the RVA, and we've been supporting this, have picked up an Australian training program. It's a good program. And they're now offering that to operators to put managers and prospective managers through a training program. And we think it's going to be a very good operation. Meanwhile, the Retirement Commissioner, with whom we have a very good relationship, has been seeking our assistance. The reason I'm leaning towards Nigel is because my head's across some of the words, so I haven't been drunk or anything. Assistance in 2 projects, standardising ORAs and dealing with the complaints process. We don't want to go into too much depth on that now, except to say there is a lawyer who has been brought in. We've met with her in Wellington. She's doing a very good paper, which will be discussed at May, and then at a big meeting in August in Wellington. And the last thing, which Nigel will roll into in a second, is our 0800 line. Nigel.
Yes. So late last year, we launched an 0800 confidential advisory service. And there's the number there. And the reason we launched this was, one, we wanted to get a little bit more of a feel for what was happening in... Do you want to get back into the system?
Sorry.
We wanted to find out what was actually happening from the coalface, and we wanted to give an opportunity for residents to be able to, I guess, talk to someone that's on the ground. So the 0800 system actually funnels calls through to a regional contact that is actually based within your area, in most of the cases around New Zealand. Otherwise, it'll come through to our main phone line. And what we want to do is gauge the extent of concerns. We want to ensure that there's an adequate sample base of data that we can make available to the Retirement Commissioner and to Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, who the Retirement Commissioner is obviously giving advice to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, who are the ones that actually conduct the legislative review. So we want to make sure they're getting the adequate information that they need to make the right decisions going forward. The Retirement Commissioner has organised for a Sarah Jones, who has come on as a retirement villages specialist, to do 2 projects. One is to research standardised occupational right agreements, and the second project, which happens a little bit later, is looking at the complaints process that currently is under the Retirement Villages Act. We also want to make sure that if someone's phoning our line and they want advice and support in stepping through the complaints process, that we can do what we can to assist them in that matter. It can be quite a daunting task to actually have to file a formal complaint and then work through the 20 working days, and then another 20 working days when the statutory supervisor gets involved, and then another 20 working days for mediation, and then we want something that's simplified, which I think is why the research that the Retirement Commissioner is doing is timely.
And on the non-legal side, it's also daunting with the number of people in villages who, and I'm very sad to say this, fear upsetting the manager of the village and fellow residents, and therefore don't want to get involved, and so the problem will just keep on going and rolling. And that's another matter we're trying to address.
Okay. I've just had a message from, by the way, thanks to our National Secretary who's managing some of this in behind the scenes. She's just texted me to say our mic's up too loud, which means probably we're talking too loud.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So anyway,
That's right?
No, that's good feedback. So anyway, it's just when you think you're talking about all the people around New Zealand, you actually have to shout. So anyway, one of the things we've noticed is there's been quite a few complaints coming through around lack of consultation when it's come to the last year and a half, 2 years of COVID. So we've been dealing with a number of complaints and concerns. And look, this isn't about whether or not you should get vaccinated or shouldn't get vaccinated. It's about the legislative framework and the right for residents to be consulted, which is covered in both the Code of Practice and the Code of Residents' Rights. What we're wanting to see is that residents are afforded that right. So we've had quite a number of complaints come through, and we're obviously getting information as the days and weeks go past. It was good news to see the announcement on the for the 4th of April that restrictions are going to be declining, which is great. There is a caveat with that, and that's from midnight, the 4th of April, although the government says you no longer need to use vaccine passports, businesses are still allowed to make their own choice as to whether or not the vaccine passport is still to be used within their own facility. So we would hope and trust that the majority of retirement villages will follow suit to remove the vaccine passport use. But
So far as we know it, the Prime Minister made the pronouncements last Wednesday morning. So tick to Al Gasparich, the Chief Executive of MetLife Care. He was first cab off the rank that afternoon, informing his clients in his villages with what the rules are going to be there, much more open. Again, Bupa the next morning put a message out to their villages, and today yesterday now, Arvida have done the same in their villages. So they're the ones we know about, and these messages roughly all say the same thing.
Yeah.
So we need to know a week from now if you haven't had a message from your village management.
Yeah, I guess if the villages have taken a more cautious stance, then we would hope that they've consulted with their residents first of all, now that there's been some easing of restrictions. Yeah. So, Peter, whereabouts are we at with the petition?
So the petition of nearly 13,000 signatures was presented on the steps of Parliament, as most of you will know, late November last year. Simon Bridges accepted it, took it into the House. The House took it on board and passed it on to the Social and Community Service Committee. They have been in touch with us. We have put some further material to them, and we will appear before that committee in a few weeks' time. That was the result of what happened in November. In December, having had a long drawn-out interchange with the minister, who was quite happy eventually to allow a review of the legislation, we met with their officials on the 17th of December, had a less than satisfactory meeting. They clearly said we're far too busy, haven't got enough people, we'll look at it at the tail end of next year. We said that's not good enough. We went around another way over Christmas, and then I, 2 Fridays ago, received a phone call from the lead official, very pleasant, They'd like to make progress now. They're going to do a scoping study. We are giving them information to work on because we have got a heap of information. And so we'll start hopefully to go forward. In March, we oh yes, I've gone ahead of myself here. Sorry about that. So also, of course, because Simon Bridges is going to be our champion in the House, as the Tauranga electorate will know, he's sadly leaving the House. So I had a discussion with him. He was extremely helpful. I suggested that Louise Upston MP, the Honourable Louise Upston, who happens to be the local MP here, I'm in Cambridge, by the way, and she has a good knowledge of the industry. How did he feel about her picking up the challenge? He said, I think she'd be first class. She's spoken to me in the last 3 days. Very happy to be our champion on the other side of the floor of the House to hold the Minister to account with regard to progressing a review of the legislation. The next slide. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you. So the scoping study is going to be underway. We'd like to think within the next month. Nothing's been declared yet by the officials in that regard, but we will keep the pressure on, we promise you, even if we have to keep referring to the Minister. And then all this will come out in the woodwork when we hold the 2 forums. We don't hold, the Retirement Commissioner holds 2 forums in May, and the really big forum in August to discuss ORAs and complaints, and we will be heavily involved in that.
Right. So we're coming now to a question time shortly, but there's a part here where we say, what can you do to ensure the progress continues? Because the reality is this comes down to a team effort. It's because of the numbers of people now that, 1, are members of the RVR, 2, signed a petition which made a few people sit up, and 3, have actually voiced their concerns to local parliamentary members and also written into government, and also to the Honourable Poto Williams. So what do we do to make sure that residents' voices are heard? Well, 1, if you have a concern or query, please use the 0800 number and address that. Again, we will document in a confidential way the bullet points of what's occurred, and then we'll give advice where we can, and support where needed. Another point is to email the chair of the Petitions Committee, and her details are there. We'll also have this on our website, so you can refer to this later if need be. The third thing is to send us a copy of your village's key term summary, or sometimes called the summary of key terms. It looks like this.
Without Peter's head. Without
Peter's head, yeah. So the summary is a document that was floated around about in 2016. It didn't receive much uptake, unfortunately, and so the RVA, so that's the Operators Association, revisited it again, and in 2020, April 2020, they mandated the use of this form with their members. The challenge we have is that we're struggling to find copies. If you move forward a little bit, you won't look like you're turning into Star Trek and disappearing.
I'm trying not to hide your form.
Okay, so the challenge is that we're trying to get copies of the summary of key terms, so that, 1, we know that they are being used. We believe it's a good document. It's a good initiative from the RVA. And but we're struggling to see where the copies are actually being used. It covers all the key details that the village contains in the occupational right agreement. And we think it's a beneficial document both for existing residents and also new residents. And so we'd like to see a copy of that. If you already got one, please send it through to us. Send it through to manager@rvranz.org.nz. The email address will be at the end. Otherwise, if you don't have one, ask your manager or your sales manager for a copy. If they don't give you one, then at least ask for them to show it to you so that you can cite it and see that there is one. But it should be a copy that you have available, because it will cover terms that even your family would benefit from, rather than having to read 60 pages of a disclosure and occupational right agreement.
So while we have you on that subject of the ORA, these two big hefty documents, from time to time, the operators alter the documents. Not the one you signed, because that's in cement, but for new entrants, and they may try it on that a certain part of the ORA has changed. And indeed it has for the new entrants, but not for you. So if you want at any stage to look at yours on a screen or in hard copy, you've got it somewhere, you can do so. But you can also go and look for your village, or any village for that matter, at all the ORAs or disclosure statements that have been lodged with the company's office. So you do this on the company's office website. Don't worry right now about how you do that.
We'll put those details on the website.
We'll put those details on the website, the little simple little how-to to go and look at those documents.
All right.
So,
and the last thing was, feel free to write to us with your story. So if you've got a good story that you'd like to tell about your village, then we'd actually love to hear that. We have email newsletters that we send out, and then we have 2 printed newsletters. So it's always great to be able to have some stories where things, some bragging stories.
Give us
the bragging stories.
We get a lot of sad news. We'd like to hear the good news too, because that's really important that we have a balanced view. Because the RVR, quite correctly, by the way, say that the greater majority of residents in villages are happy. And indeed they are.
Oh, absolutely. Satisfaction ratings are really good.
Really good. Yep. No argument about it at all. But those who are aggravated or frustrated or feel that they're being mucked about, sorry to be so blunt, and the need to get a few things lined up, they need to be heard as well. And some village managements are rather less than hasty in trying to answer problems or even sort them out.
Yeah.
And so there is a process, and as Nigel said, it's ponderous. That's part of our approach to change the laws, to change this ponderous complaint system.
I think when we look at the sector, we have to remember that 2/3 of people living in retirement villages are either single or widowed. The average age of them and others in villages is 81. So when you're looking at that demographic, we want to make sure that the legislative framework is there to protect all residents. And it's a credit to the villages that have happy residents. We think that's fantastic. But the alarming statistic, which doesn't get talked about, is the fact that we have 400 complaints, formal complaints made a year from residents in retirement villages. The international statistic is that for every 1 complaint that is made, there are another 25 people that could complain but won't because of fear of retribution, victimization, or just a fear of being, identified, or they don't want to complain. And that's not just a villages related statistic, that's an international statistic. So it's important that people do get an opportunity to be heard, and that's really what the Residents Association is about.
So we're shortly going to move into questions.
Yeah.
So before we do, the announcement by the Prime Minister last Wednesday and the subsequent rollout of letters from the operators, which basically say we're open for business as normal. That's a very short précis of a long letter. Again, is good news, because that also means we can be open for business as normal. And instead of having just to address you on this webinar system, which is extremely new to us, as it is to you, we promise you that. So we're learning. So it hasn't quite been as smooth as you would have liked it to be. Don't shoot the messenger at the moment. But we're open to come back and to talk to you in your villages, or to talk to you to decent sized groups. We don't want to travel to meet 4 people. If you can really put a decent group together, it don't just have to be from your village. We're very happy to come face to face, press the flesh, talk to you, and hear your views. Nigel.
That's great. So look, what we'll do is we'll open it up. So again, the whole objective about this webinar was to try and divide the time up reasonably evenly. So you've been listening to us for the last 20-25 minutes. Now the next 20 to 25 minutes is open to you to ask questions. We've got a couple of ways of doing that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, so you'll end up just seeing the 2 ugly faces in front of you.
Sorry,
no offense, Peter.
Sorry about that.
1 ugly face.
Yeah.
But what it'll allow you to do is you'll be able to send a chat through your browser, and you can ask questions that way, or you can text them to the phone number that's on the screen. I'll give you a moment to have a look at that phone number. So you can write that down. That's 021 138 7064. If you can send the questions to either the chat feature that's on your Teams browser in front of you, or text them there, we'll then do our best to answer as many of them as possible. And then any others that we don't get to within the time, we will make available as a Q&A type section in the next few days on our website. And we'll follow up with an email link so people can watch this if they've missed viewing. So let's just go back now. So what I'm doing now is just going to switch out of this.
So just to let you know, while Nigel's just playing with the technology, at the morning session this morning, we had 160 or so people on the system. We got a heap of questions, too many for us to answer straight off within the time allocated to us. So we answered what we thought were the key ones, but that doesn't mean that any question is too small or less meaningful than the one either side of it. And that's why we want to be able to respond to you. How we do then, Nigel?
Well, I think we're good. So I'm just looking through. So one of the things we've had, if I look back, we had some interesting questions just while people are thinking and probably putting them in. We had some questions back from earlier sessions today, Peter.
Yep.
One of them, for example, if I go back to it, said, asked whether or not the webinar will be available for later on, and we said yes, it'll be recorded and we'll send out a link. There was the question that said, as we continue to live with COVID, will villages be likely to be restricted from any activities? And I guess what our answer to that is that it is possible. It is possible that there may be some restrictions because the government has allowed the businesses to make their own call as to whether they continue the vaccine passport or not, and continue therefore with restrictions. The challenge is that if that is the case, then there really should be consultation that occurs between the operator or the business owner and the residents for that. So we'd hoped that that consultation does occur, or that the restrictions are in line with the reduction that the government has already announced for the 4th of April.
So if you feel that you're not getting sufficient consultation from your village management, just refer them to the Code of Practice, Clause 28, and it's very, very clearly sets out there, and these are my words for it, that if there is to be a change in the operation of the village, the residents shall be consulted. Very simple stuff. There's much more beside, but that's the basis of it.
Okay.
And by the way, while we're talking, you'll be pleased to know each one of you are part of 228 people who are on this call right now.
Yeah. So one point's just come in. When we talked about writing to Jackie Dean, so going to the select committee. That's based around the petition, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the petition was covering 2 items, Peter.
Yes, it was indeed. And one was early payback of the sum less DMF, on average 70%, but it varies in villages. On average 70% that is due back to you, and many of you don't see that until, but the high majority of you don't see that until your house has been marketed, sold, relet, and the new owner of the license has paid, and 5 working days later you'll get your money. Now we're saying that's ridiculous, especially where somebody is going into care and needs that money to help them buy an ORA to go into care in their village in one of these lovely care centres. And there are some great care centres around the place. And so we said we'd like it back in 28 days. Now, that's what the petition says.
Yep, and the other part was the full legislative review.
Yeah.
And I guess that's where we've seen it's really important that that there are reminders and conversations continually occurring to ensure that this is kept top of mind. So if the association will be continuing to do just that, but again, if you're great at putting pen to paper, please do so, and the contact details we'll look at putting on the website as well.
Yep.
Should you need those. I did have another another question come through. Let's just look here. This one says, is the question of shared capital appreciation likely to be included in any legislative change? That's from Terry. Now, look, that's a really good question, Peter. So I guess the question is, are we likely to see shared capital gain introduced as a legislative change?
Okay, this is very early days. The argument's very simple. If you don't own the bricks and mortar, how can you expect to have a capital gain in something that has been sold that you don't own? That's the simplistic view, and that is the operator's view, and we understand that view. What we're saying basically is, if you have to wait, 6, 9, 12 months to get your money, why can't you have some of the capital gain that recompenses you for waiting for that at the same time?
Yeah.
There are some villages that do that. There's a village I know in Wellington Well, I have a relative in it, and they get a 50% capital gain. But there are other things they may not get as well.
Mm.
So it's a wee bit of swings and roundabouts, this one. It can be a hot potato, but we don't want it to be a showstopper.
No, I think what we've seen overseas, so if you look at the legislative changes that happened in Australia, and each state is governed differently, when they introduced legislative changes, what it did was it actually diversified the model. So it created more opportunities, and we saw where villages weren't offering capital gain, but had to now all of a sudden have guaranteed buybacks introduced. They then started to offer capital gain to try and get out of those immediate buybacks, which they would incurred. And we'd support that. We supported that in the white paper document.
Yes, we did.
That was put together. The RVR said, look, there's an option here. If a retirement village is offering shared capital gain, then they shouldn't have to pay back straight away, because you wouldn't get your money straight away. If you owned the house and were sharing in the full capital gain, you wouldn't get your money until you'd actually sold it. So it's not fair to actually expect a village to do the same if they're sharing some of the capital gain with you. But if they're not sharing any of the capital gain, then the question sort of is, what's the difference between that and a rental property where you have a bond, and that bond needs to be repaid within 23 working days of exit? And I know the payment back to you is a lot larger than a bond. But I guess that's the example. So trying to find a balance between the two, it may not be legislated, but I would say that we'll see some variation happen within the model. And with housing prices. Now, Peter, you were talking in the first webinar about the rental model, perhaps.
Oh, yes. Yes. So this is a bit of crystal ball gazing. And my crystal ball is no better than your crystal ball. But without doubt, and I've had a discussion with the retirement commissioner on this and one or two operators, people generally come into these villages for a whole variety of reasons. But the means that enable them to come in is money. And most of them are doing it because over their lifetime, they have bought houses, kept them clean and tidy, enhanced them, sold them, moved on, and generally moved up the equity wealth chain as they get into better houses and make better returns. And in latter years, of course, helped by this crazy housing market that the country is experiencing. So that's fine. What's happening further down in the age tracker is there are a whole bunch of people now in their 50s, and the government's well aware of this, and the Retirement Commission is especially aware of it, is that there are a bunch of people who have never bought houses. They haven't got into this equity ladder, if I can call it that. And so either because they didn't want to, and therefore they spent their money on other things, or they haven't been able to, especially in latter years when young people now have to pay goodness knows how many times their worth just to get a deposit on a house. So what's going to happen in about 10 to 15 years when the current residents, and possibly the next 5 years worth of residents coming in, have passed on and out of the system for whatever reason, my personal view is that there will be a lack of demand for some of these villages, and they will have to accept people who cannot put down the money and therefore have to turn them into rental properties. Very much a personal view. We haven't discussed it as an executive, but it's out there to be thought about.
So here's another question, Peter. Someone's just asked, re-capital gain, what about gain as a result of improvements paid for by the resident? So the situation might be you've moved into or moving into a retirement village, and you've decided you wanted that conservatory added on. So you've paid an extra 70,000+ for that glass box, but it's now increased the value of the units 150,000+.
But before you have the argument with the operator about that, go and read your ORA. And if it says in there that any improvements that you've made will not be realized at the end of the journey, you haven't got a leg to stand on. And it comes back to people, that's residents, as well as a few years ago as lawyers, of not having a good enough grip on the industry. I think that when we come to the legislation and hopeful changes to legislation, we should be able to have that placed within it. So that if you have you put in your what was it, 150,000?
Well, let's say it was 70,000 that you paid for something.
So you put it in, you're not going to get your 70, you're going to get what it's worth at the time, because it will depreciate too, of course.
That's an interesting one, because sometimes things are depreciated. So the business, the village actually depreciates any additions, doesn't it?
Yep.
But yet it actually still appreciates the value of the entire.
We need a room of lawyers for that one, Nigel.
Yeah, I think that could be one. But I guess the caveat there is to actually have the discussion prior to making the change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a matter actually we can bring up at the forum in August, because I think that's a worthwhile subject to bring up.
Here's a good question, and it's one that we've had asked quite a few times. Someone's asked, does written advice of a change constitute as consultation?
No. Consulting is all about having a conversation.
It's about a dialogue, isn't it?
Absolute
Yep.
dialogue. And if the dialogue is written or verbal, it really doesn't matter to me. It has to be a two-way. It has to be a two-way flow. A written advice that something changed him, he's actually rather dictatorial.
Yeah. So if you are in a village where some changes have been made that have impacted you materially, so that you've lost access to facilities, or a change has been made that's impacted you financially, then the operator has a duty of care to actually consult its residents first. The consultation means the decision can't actually be made. It must actually come with some discussion, some options. They can present a preferred option, but then they put it forward and up for discussion and consultation to get feedback from the residents, and then go away, take time to make that decision, and then present that decision to the residents.
Yeah.
But it's a legislated right, and it's giving you the right as a big investor in the village to have some say in how things affect you. I think that
good. How are we doing with the questions, Nigel?
Well, we're good. I'm just flicking through. Another question. So, what if a village was to consult, or the operator was to consult with the residents committee, but not the residents? Does that conclude as consultation?
Hey, that's a good question. In a well-run residents committee, and some of them are extremely well-run, and some of them become the plaything of managers in some villages, a discussion with the residents committee, in my view, about a change. If they've got any brains, they will go out to their members, who are all members of the village association, and if necessary, put a meeting together to discuss the change. You know, we're talking about major change here. We're not talking cutting down a tree, you know, or shifting a letterbox or something minor like that. But something that really materially affects your enjoyment of the village, that you expected from the moment you went in. That's a worthwhile discussion, and the residents committee should, without doubt, consult with all their members before they give the manager an answer.
Okay, so a well-run village with a well-run residents committee, does that still bypass the legislated right for the individuals to be consulted?
No, I'm not a lawyer here.
No.
Nigel's pinning me in a corner.
I guess I'm just.
He is. It's okay.
It's a fair question to ask.
My view is, if there's going to be a material change, I'll use my village as an example, right? And this is to do with the swimming pool. It was a chlorine swimming pool for the thick end of 10 years. A decision was made, and a lot of discussion held with the residents, that the chlorine pool wasn't the best thing to be having, and it should be mineral pool, and it has been changed. It's taken 3 times as long as it should, but it doesn't matter. We now have a mineral pool, which the mineral is salt, incidentally, and everybody's happy and is swimming again after roughly an 8 or 9 months delay. But there was consultation. It wasn't just a bald statement.
Okay, great. All right. So someone's made just a point that their village is offering free 2 years fees. So I'm guessing free 2 years fees with no consultation. You might want to just expand on that a bit further.
Whoever sent
Patricia,
it's you. Our village is offering free 2 years fees with no consultation. We don't understand that. If you can expand on that, either here or send Nigel or I an email. He's manager at RVR,
so this is the weekly
or president.
Fees. Yeah,
weekly fees. We'll be happy to know.
Hey, look, if the village is offering you to move in and you don't have to pay fees for 2 years, well, is it affecting the village? So the question would be, the question I would ask then is, are you on fixed fees for life, or are you on variable fees?
Yeah.
In other words, can the operator change your fee each year, or as it chooses? Is it linked to CPI or Super N, or is it one of those ones where they say, look, we've incurred some costs And so therefore, are you squint? Is my screen that small?
Yeah, but I'm just getting Patricia's name.
That's good. So
Patricia, Nigel and I are working on
we'll come to you.
tiny print. I've got your name down. I can find you through
Yeah,
our database.
so she said,
I will give you a phone call.
We might actually come back to you on that, but I would say if it affects you, so if your fees are going up, but they're offering sweet deals to other people, then the question would be and it's impacting you materially and financially, then there should be a discussion and consultation. If it's not affecting you materially, then operators can change their packages, and some. The fees go up. So we know people that entered villages on $79 a week weekly fee, and that's because they got in at the grassroots before the community centre was even built, and it was fixed for life. And then other people are moving in after the community centre is built and the village is established, and they're now on $139 a week.
And the rest.
Yeah, and the rest. We did have one also on fees. If your fees go up considerably over the next 6, 12, 18 months, can you let us know? We'd be interested to get feedback. We are starting to hear about some fees going up 6 to 8%.
So those of you whose weekly fees are aligned to the cost of living CPI, and we know that the cost of living index this year is rising dramatically. The guesstimate, because the government hasn't announced it yet, they will pre-budget, is going to be on the north side of 6%. And if you're on say $150 a week, you can soon work out that that's around about, I think about $8 from memory, changed your weekly fee. And there are a lot of people in villages who we know their only income is the government pension, who are really pleased when they can get the rebate of rates applicable to their villa back through the local council. It's from the government via the local council. So an $8 change to them basically means less heating or less food in many cases.
Right. Hey, look, I had we'll wrap it up in a minute, Peter. So
yep.
I've got down here. Someone asked when an operator changes hands. So you've got when a village changes hands, and the contract that you've signed with operator A has now gone. Well, the operator's gone. Does that contract still stand?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Yes.
You mean when they change operators?
Yeah, they change operators.
Oh, well,
can the operator, the new operator, suddenly change terms and conditions that differ to the occupational right agreement?
In my view, no. And when this village was built by operator A, we had about 5 years of them, I'd guess. And then operator B came along, the managing director of the company, who we are still under, which was Arvida, made a statement to us, to every one of you in this room at the moment who have been with operator A, your agreement in total will stand, regardless of what we do for new entrants coming in.
Yeah.
They were very, very good and very loyal.
Yeah. You can change an occupational right agreement by mutual agreement, and that would require both of you signing it, and it would probably require some legal advice as well, because you have to sit down and have legal advice when you're signing an ORA. So if there's any major change that you're making, it would involve most likely some legal advice on that. Last question that I've had come through is where a village has changed from weekly, fortnightly or monthly service fees to a set payment for life. So I'm guessing they're talking about where a village has been on a variable weekly fee, and they've now said, look, we're going to shift to a fixed fee for life.
I can handle that.
Okay. Should written notice? Should we be given written notification of the amount.
Of course they should.
Absolutely.
Again, just going back to operator A, operator B for this village, is that the new operator came in, and at the same meeting, this is when we first met them, said, you know, your ORA stands, and you can carry on having your weekly fee adjusted to CPI or cost of living, or we will offer you a flat fee for life. And they mention, and that will apply to anybody new coming in now, and that you can have that if you want. And quite a few of us did the sums on that and took the cost of living up to about 5% over 20 years, and it wasn't worth taking their offer. In my case, my wife and I's case, we are still $25 a week under that fee for life figure that they quoted. That said, newer entrants into this village I'm sitting in now, in the last couple of years, maybe last year, that fee for them entering is $40 a week more than that first flat fee that was intimated when the new owner came along.
Okay, so
it's buyer beware stuff.
Yeah, so those people that did actually, that's not this one here. So those people that had actually moved in 2 years ago and had fixed were better off than the ones that moved in 2 years later.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Hey, look, we've reached our time, and so just to finish off, we have an email address, and I'm just going to put that back on the screen again so that you can see that. So if you are interested in sending us an email or contacting us, then there are the details. Hopefully you can see that. No, I will just check again. It's always great with technology, isn't it? You just love it.
There you go.
This is supposedly my screen, so I can see it. If you can't see the number, or the email address, it's manager@rvranz.org.nz, or you can email secretary@rvranz.org.nz. We'll endeavour to get any other questions that you send through onto a Q&A, which will hopefully be posted in the next few days, and we will send out an email link once that's done.
So just in closing down, first of all, our thanks to the 228 of you who are sitting in front of your own screens, and our thanks to those of you who invited friends and neighbours in also to watch. Thank you for doing that. We really appreciate that. Not everybody will like this type of presentation. This is a means to an end. But as I said earlier, the doors are opening again. In fact, one village has already made a booking for me to speak on the 22nd of April. So the chocolate fish for initiative will go to Juliet Brown at the Bethlehem Country Club in Tauranga because they made things move. So talk to your regional chairs and they can help put together presentations to decent sized groups. Yep. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you for supporting us. I'm going to put a plug. It's subscription time on the 1st of April. The sooner they come in, the better our cash flow.
Absolutely.
All right, Nige?
Yeah, no, that's great. And printed newsletter hopefully coming out end of April/early May. If your village does not have a village contact, it just makes it a little bit harder to get the newsletters to you, but they'll be crammed packed with additional information as well. So lovely to have you joining us. And again, those details on the screen. Any other questions, we will look forward to responding in due course. All right. Many thanks. And
thank you, folks. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.